Hi, my name is Singh, and I'm broadcasting from New Jersey on behalf of Stanford Online High School students from across the globe. So, hello world. With us here today is Mr. Stuart Schmill, the Dean of Admissions at MIT. Thank you so much for your time. I sincerely appreciate it.
It's great to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
A lot of students are becoming interested in pursuing tech entrepreneurship after college. So, what is MIT doing to attract those students since they might be good at math and science, but not necessarily interested in hardcore engineering? Because MIT does have a great business school, but a lot of the time the perception people still have is that it's a heavily science-based school instead of in business.
Yeah, it is interesting about these perceptions, and I know we'll talk about them as we go through. I mean, MIT has one of the most active and vibrant entrepreneurial ecosystems around. The space around MIT, in Kendall Square, for example, right adjacent to our campus, as well as the entire Boston and Cambridge area, is really vibrant with startups in different industries. Startups, there's a lot of venture capital here, and companies, I think, understand this ecosystem and have been moving to it, and it's been growing. The biotech industry, certainly information technology, green technology, all of that is really quite vibrant here. And MIT students do have a deep interest in creating new ventures, starting companies. That's always been true. I mean, MIT has always been about creating new things and innovating. And I think one of the things that you do get at MIT is a really deep knowledge, both technical, but also on the other aspects of what you need, the kinds of skills you need to be able to successfully start a company. There was a study done just a couple of years ago that shows that if you look at all of MIT's living alumni, it's about 130 living alumni, 130,000 living alumni. Those alumni have started 26,000 companies, and they estimate that 2/3 of those companies are still in existence.
Wow.
And it's the kind of thing where our students really are given quite a deep knowledge and set of skills to be successful in their ventures.
And it certainly is true that there are a lot of talent, especially in business, in MIT. With Drew Houston, he gave the commencement speech at MIT. He founded Dropbox, and just in general in that area, there are such a pool of great geniuses. With another great school being not too far from you down the road. Speaking of that, how does MIT differentiate itself from the other schools?
Well, it's interesting. I think first I want to make it clear that we also collaborate. So we differentiate, but also collaborate. And particularly with Harvard, there are a number of really strong collaborations that exist. The Broad Institute for Genomic Research is another example, is a good example, as well as some of our life science programs and research institutes. So there are some good collaborations that occur, as well as the easy ability for students to cross-register between the two places. But yeah, I mean, I think we're a different place. And I think it's one of the great things about the higher education system in the US is that universities are different. And I think MIT has a unique set of strengths, and other schools have different sets of strengths. And I think students and faculty try to find the places that are the best match for their interests. And I think for MIT, we're a place that's certainly well centered on science and engineering. But we, of course, do have other areas that are very strong, the social sciences, economics, political science, linguistics. There's a whole range of things, not to mention the business school, of course, School of Architecture and Urban Planning. Very strengths across the board, but students essentially often come here, have a real interest and facility with analytic thinking. And that's something that MIT really fosters. And then you learn how to use that analytic thinking to solve the big problems that exist in the world.
And there's
I think, yeah.
And there certainly has been a lot of collaboration between, edX or even the Coop, the bookstore, as an MIT and Harvard version. And so, where do you think the future is in terms of how, because a major milestone in MOOCs or the online courses was the collaboration between MIT and Harvard and edX. Where do you see MIT's role in education in the long term? Will there be more online classes, or do you see, just in general, virtual learning?
Yeah, I think first of all, I think you point out a great collaboration again, which I think as we go into the future, collaboration, I think you'll see more of it, and certainly it's a way to make things better. I mean, when you problem solve, you don't do it alone. You bring in the views of others, and I think edX is a good example of that. I do think that online learning is going to change the way students learn. It already has. I mean, there are a number of pilot used online learning to enhance the educational experience, the learning in the classroom. I think also there'll be opportunities for students to not be tied to a location. I mean, obviously, here, look who I'm talking to in terms of understanding the value and the power of what online learning can be in terms of its ability, number one, to not force students to be tied to a location, but also the types of collaborations that the internet can foster can really be very powerful. And I think you see this in your classes, certainly, the ability to interact with like-minded students of the same high caliber. And I think that is going to, I think the use of that in more traditional learning settings is going to grow.
And that's, what were you saying about the growing to grow? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I do think it's going to grow. And I do think there is value, of course, in place-based education where people are able to be together. And I think what you'll see are these hybrids that will emerge more to allow more flexibility. And I think there are a lot of examples of that. Certainly some of the way that our classes are being taught here at MIT. Certainly a great example of this, of course, is Khan Academy. And, you can, and of course, Sal Khan, who's an MIT graduate, I think has really developed a phenomenal program to allow students really to individualize learning. And that's very, very powerful.
Certainly that's been seen. I watched your interview with you and Mr. Khan, and the type of education that's been brought forth and the number of students who have been able to help with this is amazing. We recently interviewed Coursera's COO, and even if you look at schools like Stanford Online High School, I think there's close to 30 countries being represented at our school. It's unbelievable what you would have thought if this. No one could have imagined it 15 years ago.
Yeah, and think how valuable that is. I mean, one of the great things about education, certainly, and the way students learn is adding in perspectives from their fellow classmates. It's certainly true here at MIT, right? Students learn more from each other than they do from any other mechanism. I presume you have a similar experience, and think of the students that you get to interact with around the globe. Kind of thing that certainly 20 years ago or more didn't really have the ability to do that.
And a lot of different universities are also diving into this. I was in San Francisco a couple weeks ago, and maybe 2 months ago, and I noticed they had a satellite campus for Wharton now, because that's the heart of Silicon Valley, so they also want to get interested in that. And there was an article I recently read about Minerva that had an acceptance rate the last year of 1.5%. They said it was the most selective school in the country. So it shows that is a possibility going forward, where students can take some online classes but immerse themselves in a lot of different environments, since at Minerva they travel to different countries every semester.
Yeah, I think it's great. Some of the experiments that we're doing at MIT, we have a master's program where we are, where the first year is open. It's a MOOC-based program, and essentially students can take those classes and demonstrate how strong they are. And based on their performance in those classes, will determine how they get admitted to the second half of the master's degree, which will be a more campus-based program, without worrying about other kinds of credentials and background that they have to have. It's basically really the internet can be a real equalizer and a democratizer, because you don't have to have the same kinds of experiences of other students. Essentially allows you to demonstrate what your talents are, and if you can demonstrate it, then that's all you need to do.
Obviously, there's so many opportunities available for MIT students, the challenges for people to get into MIT first. So I guess moving on to questions about the admissions process, a lot of people, it's amazing how MIT has such a high level of students, and how do you select that? Is it through the essay? How do you value the essay? And Stanford places emphasis on intellectual vitality. We interviewed Mr. Shaw, their Dean of Admissions, earlier. So what's your perception or opinion on the essay and how students what you look for?
So the essay is one part of our application, and we gather input on students from a whole range of different ways. So we look at the classes that students took. We look at the activities. Essentially, what we're trying to do is figure out what is the student interested in and how do they pursue their interests. And so what they do with their time gives us a window onto that. So they write essays. We also ask for teacher recommendations and counselor recommendations. And so we gather all that together. We also have an interview, which is part of our process. So I won't say that any one piece of that is more important than any other piece, although certainly we do look at how strong your grades are, particularly in the math science courses. But I think we just take all of the pieces together and form a unified view of what of the student. And essentially what we're looking for is how well matched they are to MIT, how well aligned they are with the mission of MIT, and also how well aligned they will be with our educational environment. So let me say a little bit more about that. The mission of MIT, to apply science and technology and other areas of scholarship to make the world a better place. So that's, in one sentence, faculty and students together are working on solving the greatest challenges that the world has. And that's what motivates our faculty, it's what motivates our students. And so we have some interest when we're evaluating students or candidates is to see, all right, now we don't expect them to have solved any world problems to this point, but we want to get a sense for what motivates them. And are they motivated to try to work on important problems in the world? Do they want to make the world a better place? Now, students can demonstrate that in many different ways. We don't expect students to have had some major world impact to this point, but we do hope that students will have had some positive impact on the people around them. And maybe that means their family. Maybe it means their classmates. Could mean or their community in general. So we look for that. So again, that's in alignment with our mission. We also think about the culture of MIT. Again, it is an academically challenging place for all students. So there are no easy paths through MIT. And so every student that we admit has to be ready for that, for the environment where it will challenge you. Okay, so the classes will challenge you, the research opportunities will challenge you. And so we want to see, okay, well, how do students going to perform in that environment? So we look to see, okay, is this a student who, first of all, is interested and motivated to work hard? Are they willing to try things if they don't know they're going to succeed? So will you try something thinking you might fail at it? Because that happens all the time here at MIT. In fact, that's what the scientific method is. It's what science engineering, that's what problem solving is. You try something, it doesn't work, you try it again. So we want to see that spirit of resilience, not being stopped by some kind of failure. We like to see curiosity. Again, MIT students like to create new things. And so we want to see if there's any of that spirit there. We want to see students who are going to contribute to the education of their fellow students. I said earlier how our students learn as much or more from each other than they do from any other mechanism. And so we want to bring students here who are going to help their fellow students learn as well. So those are a few of the things that we look for and when we evaluate students. And you said earlier we do get a lot of applications. We can admit only a small number, and so those are the things we look for. But I want to reassure everyone out there that if you're not admitted to MIT, it doesn't mean you don't have those things. Of our 19,000 applicants last year, a very high percentage of them were phenomenally good students, phenomenally good people, very curious, very engaged, enthusiastic, all of the things that we look for. Most of our applicants have that. So if you're not admitted, it doesn't mean that you don't have those things.
You're speaking of the importance of students giving back to their community. And I remember, you had a great segment with Matt Lauer on, I think, the Today Show about a new report that came out, and it's encouraging students to really talk about themselves and the contributions they make in their own, home or whatever. And that also ties into the fact that I guess it's to have less pressure on students. I noticed, does that play a role in the fact that MIT doesn't use a Common App, or what's the reason for that?
Yeah, so first let me talk about the report that you referenced that came out of the Harvard Graduate School of Education. It's called Turning the Tide. And the initiative essentially is trying to get the message out to students. Number one, that your high school years should be about learning and engagement, and you should not distort that in order to try to become a better college applicant. I think sometimes students do distort that. They try to load up on too many things, too many activities, and it's really not helpful. It's also not necessary, but I think it's worse than not being necessary. It's a negative. I think students would do well to just think about what are you interested in, and then pursue those things that interest you with as much energy and enthusiasm as you can. But don't think that you have to do everything. You don't have to have every advanced class on your resume. You should have some. You should be challenging yourself in the areas most interesting to you. It doesn't have to be across the board. Same thing with your activities. You don't need a laundry list or a 4-page resume or even a 1-page resume. Pick a couple things, one thing even, that really interests you, and jump into it. And of course, the benefit of that is you're going to do it better. First of all, if you're not spreading yourself so thin, you can focus and spend time on the things you really like to do. But when you like to do something, you're going to engage with it more. You're going to do better at it, and that kind of feedback helps. And so I think one of the things with that report, we tried to really send that message that of what students need to do, because I think there's some sense that students have that they need to do things that that really are not true. So with one voice, we're trying to really send that message. Now, the other piece of that is that ethical character does matter, and being a good citizen does matter. Interesting example, a lot of students doing community service, which is terrific. Of course, in our application, when we ask students about how they serve the community, we never use the phrase community service. We just talk about how are you influencing in a positive way those around you. And as I said, it could be a family member, it could be classmates, or somewhere in the broader community. But Sometimes I think students are engaging in community service because they think it's good for them, which it is. But really what we want students to have this perspective is helping others is good for others. And I mean, of course, it's good for you. And one of the oftentimes when I'm out talking with students, I'll ask them this question. If you're doing an activity and you couldn't write about it in your college application, would you still do it? And if the answer is no, then you probably shouldn't do it. And you ought to focus on those things that you really, really want to do. So the hope is that students are doing things because they want to, not because they think it's going to look good. So with this report, we really try to send that message to students, clarifying what's important.
And, that reminds me of, I read a joke that if marathons were anonymous, no one would be running marathons, because I think everyone does it just to say they ran a marathon or to post it on Facebook or whatnot.
Yep.
And it reminds me of one of our interviews was Jacqueline Fuller, the director of Google.org, Google's charitable arm. And one of the most important things she said is that students feel like they have to do some extravagant project or go to Kenya and solve, it doesn't have to be that huge. You rather, do a problem that you can accomplish and you can fix, even whether it's small and in your community. I think that's the perception that students need to have, in my opinion.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think, in many ways, affecting those around you is even more important, because this is your community. And if people are not paying attention to their own communities, their own families, their schools, their classes, people who live around them, you really have to pay attention to that. People don't do that. That's where the fabric of society just melts away. And I think we really want to strengthen that. People have to pay attention to those around them. Yeah, so the way you can help others doesn't have to be halfway around the world. I mean, I think travel and opportunities overseas are wonderful things, and they do expand people's minds. So I'm not negative on those. I think those are great opportunities, but they shouldn't be looked at as like your duty. Okay, now I'm done. I don't have to help anybody anymore. I don't have to engage with the community anymore because I just did that trip for 2 weeks. It's not about that. It's really about how are you affecting your community.
So we know that MIT doesn't recruit athletes per se, and MIT being a challenging school with the science and lab works taking a lot of time as they do, the student athletes who are on campus, they have to cope with both sides. And since you've been closely associated with athletics and academics, having been a crew coach, what's your recommendation? How have you seen students deal with this challenge?
Well, we do recruit student athletes and love that our great students also are great athletes. So we are definitely interested in students who can do both. It's true that our admissions process is a little bit different for student athletes in that we don't hold out slots or do early admissions, or we don't pull out our athletes into some kind of a separate admissions process. But we do value students who are great athletes in the same way that we value students that have all kinds of great talents. And we have a very vibrant athletic program as a result of it. One of the things that is true about the way we recruit and admit and enroll athletes at MIT is that we hold them to the very same academic standards as every other student. And our student athletes are all very engaged in their academics. And so students who will participate very seriously, I mean, we have national champions here at MIT. We've had Olympic athletes and really talented athletes. But every one of those students is also just as engaged in their academics and doing research and internships and all the rest of it as well. So you can do both.
And now we'll have Dr. Lips ask a few questions. We were talking. He's also deals a lot with students applying to colleges, and he sees the whole perspective that you don't necessarily have to be a jack of all, but then you end up being a master of none. That type of philosophy.
Yeah, so I mean, I really just have one pretty large, wide-ranging question. Maybe you can give some thoughts on. So, in a hyper-selective process like yours, where you have many more qualified applicants than you could admit, and you touched on that a little bit. So, students and families, they often come to us believing that the process is essentially random. And I'm just wondering what your thought or response to that observation is, because it's something that does come up quite a bit with students and families.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. And I have a daughter that is a junior in high school now, and so I'm seeing it through that lens. So, of course, I wouldn't characterize it as random because I think we are intentional about the students that we admit. So we're not just gathering up applicants, narrowing the pool, and then just randomly picking students. We're not doing that. What we are doing is we have this applicant pool and we narrow it down. And we do that in an intentional way. As I said earlier, we do it essentially by looking at applicants and seeing how well matched they are to MIT. I think the reason it can feel random is because of the students that we ultimately admit, there are just as many, in fact, many times over the number of students who are certainly just as well qualified or who are well qualified for us who we don't admit. And, oftentimes we are splitting hairs on students. And I think that can feel random because from any one student's perspective, you don't see any of the other applicants. And so you really don't have a sense. You think, oh my gosh, I'm very well qualified. I should be able to be admitted. And the reality is, yes, it's true, student well qualified, but just because we have so many applicants, we can pick only so many. Many very qualified students are not going to be admitted. Now, when we do admit students, we look at it really through two different perspectives, two lenses when we do our process. One is really at the individual student level. We look at, as I said, students who are very well matched to MIT and all the qualities I mentioned around engagement, enthusiasm, resilience, etc., in addition to their academic abilities. So we look at it through that lens, but we also recognize that we are bringing in a class of students that are going to support each other, challenge each other, and learn from each other. And so diversity is important to us. MIT is better because we are as diverse of a place as we are. And we can do that because we are intentional about our admissions process. And so we think about the collection of students that we admit together to make sure that we do have diversity there. All of those things are really unseen by students and families. They can't know all of those other factors that we see. So for them, it's hard to know. I think adults can, and not just adults, but kids too. Anybody who's ever applied for a job, it's the same thing, right? You apply for a job, maybe really well qualified, but they've got a lot of candidates. You don't get every job you apply for, and even though you might do great at it. And so same kind of thing. We have a lot of students who would all be great here, but we can only pick so many. And so I understand this notion of feeling like it's random, but it's really not random. We are intentional about the students we're admitting, both thinking about their match to MIT, but then the intentionality comes in when we think about diversity as well.
I certainly, feel that, and I hear the sentiment or the squawk on the street in terms of, I'm a senior in high school, and all the students talk about, well, MIT is so it's focused on math and science. So if you aren't necessarily want to be an engineer, if you're more into business, there's so few seats, you have to, that's why I guess students are applying to so many different colleges, maybe because the admission rates are going down. It's an interesting aspect, hearing from the student side too.
Yeah. So certainly students, we do have many students who are interested in the business program, the economics program. And, there's no advantage or disadvantage. There's probably a proportional number of applicants interested in those as there are students who study those fields. Now, of course, if you're interested in economics, for example, or any of these other programs, architecture, urban planning, linguistics, philosophy, any of those, political science, what makes you a good MIT economics student may be very different from what might make you a good economics student at some other school. Again, because MIT has just a different program. In particular, our emphasis on analytic skills, analytic thinking. We start using higher level math right away. Not all students interested in economics is interested in that. But for students who are interested in studying something that is not math and science, but they are still aligned with MIT's mode of thinking and are good with taking math and science, because you're going to have to do that here. I think it's a really valid thing if you want to come and study political science here. It's a great thing and great opportunity. I mean, our department, our faculty are phenomenal. I mean, they're world class. And so it's an opportunity. And I don't think students should shy away from that, because they think of MIT as this engineering and science institute.
And so now we'll move on to a couple short answer, fun questions, just answer briefly. So what's your favorite thing to do in your free time?
Free time?
Do you have any? What's your schedule like now?
Well, I used to say used to like to hang out with my family, but now my two daughters are teenagers, and so they are less interested in that. But I do like to spend time with my wife and friends. Spend time with friends. You mentioned earlier that I was involved with the rowing team here, and while I don't row consistently, but every so often through the year, I will still compete. In a couple of weeks is the head of the Charles Regatta, and I'm going to be racing in that. So I'm trying to get ready for that. I do work out and exercise here and there. So.
Oh boy, I know rowing too. Do you also hate 2Ks, or is it I hate them, but it's quite
it's good medicine.
Okay. And so in terms of your free time, is there a favorite site or magazine you like to read to get your news?
So I usually will look at, the New York Times is the most common. I mean, I read the Boston Globe as well. Those are probably the two most common sites that I check. Yeah.
Would you rather have one wish granted today or 3 in 10 years?
Could I wish for 5 in 10 years today? If that were part of it, I would do that.
How about 5 in 8 years? No, I'm just kidding.
No, I think I am pretty good at delaying gratification onward, so I would take 3 in 10 years.
Have you also heard of the Marshmallow experiment? That was so interesting, especially watching the videos of the students and the tiny children wanting to eat it, but they can't delay the gratification.
I think if you asked me that at age 4, I probably would have taken the marshmallow right away.
Who wouldn't have? So, well, I guess some people who get into MIT wouldn't have taken marshmallow. Would you rather win an Olympic medal or an Academy Award?
An Olympic medal.
In any sport that comes to mind, which you would, rowing or crew, I'm assuming.
Well, rowing, yeah, although I've never been to the Olympics or coached at the Olympics, but I've coached and competed at relatively high levels, and I've raced with national team folks. In fact, in the race in a couple of weeks, I'll be racing with a couple of Olympic medal winners, and so I have enormous respect for the athletes that put in the dedication to win at that level. It is a really, really impressive accomplishment. So that's That's why that's what I would go for. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, certainly. Do you go to the Crash Bees? Those are on Boston, right? My sister does them. I think she came third. And so I also, come along with her.
Yeah.
I competed last year.
Impressive, yeah. I mean, Crash Bees, we used to host it at MIT until it grew too big. And yeah, I mean, it's really impressive, the performances that people put in.
And so if you could trade lives with any person for a day, who would it be?
I could trade lives with anyone for a day. Well, it would be really interesting to be a high school senior.
No, trust me, you don't want my life. Or any
I'd like to see what. See, you said it's only for a day, so I could come back.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And we have 2 more questions left. So this one is a little easier because the last one, it's a doozy. So this one, juice or soup?
Soup.
And the last one, Caltech or Stanford?
And I don't notice MIT being part of the.
This one's a tough one.
And you also didn't say for what?
For engineering or business.
For better or for worse.
Engineering.
It's hard. It's just so hard to imagine either way. Now, I do have a JPL mug on my desk, so I may have to just say Caltech because of that. A friend of mine, classmate of mine who works there, gave that to me, so I will have to go with the home institution of JPL.
Was it Mr. Whitney? He was at the end of a nice bucket challenge. He nominated you to be next on the show. So I guess
so Jared. Yeah, so I in fact just saw Jared in my office yesterday. Jared Whitney, who's the dean of admission at Caltech. We're very good friends. He is not the one who gave me this mug. He did give me another Caltech mug that I have in my other office, but this was a classmate of mine at MIT who gave me this, who works there. But and in fact, we are all friends. So I'm friendly with Jared Whitney, who's the Caltech dean, but I'm also friendly with Rick Shaw, who's the dean of admission at Stanford. And, we're all actually really good friends. I know sometimes there's this sense of competition that gets played up a little bit, but really it's all in good fun. And we're good friends. We collaborate, we talk with each other, and we support each other. So
it's not like at a lunch. What was your admissions rate acceptance rate this year?
No, well, we don't worry about it because I think we generally are doing pretty well, getting some great students here. So yeah.
So that was the end of the interview. Would like to thank you for graciously sparing your time for us here at Pixel Talk and inspiring not only the Stanford OHS community but youth around the country and perhaps even around the world.
Terrific. Well, thanks for having me, and I just want to wish everybody really the best of luck. And again, remember, don't overstress about this. Just find what you love to do and do it, and everything's going to work out great wherever you wind up.